Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Super License F1 podcast. My name's Rodney.
And my name is Zach.
Good to be talking to you, Zach, this race week. We don't usually indulge in the sort of hype sensation that is race week. But, I mean...
We just do a Formula One show.
It's been such a long time coming, and we've been waiting for months and months and months for another race, so please just indulge us for these few seconds that it takes for us to say it's a race week. Zach, how excited are you?
I'm really excited. I said last show that I was just keeping my powder dry a little bit for racing to come back, and this is the weekend. This is the one. You know, regardless of all of the weird procedures, and we'll discuss those, and all of the concerns about different races and tracks, and what will this season entail, and contracts, and all these kinds of things. We can all forget about that because there will be some level of regularity returned now that we've got, you know, the kind of somewhat procedural F1 weekend coming up. It's something that we know, we're familiar with, we understand, terms that get bandied around that we know, tyre compounds, pit stop, just the things like that. That
Pit
just
stop, really technical terms like car and wheels.
Driver, helmet, all of these things that, you know, show that you really understand Formula One. I am excited.
I'm the first one to admit that our F1 show is usually a bit of a fuck around, but it just seemed like, given that the return of F1 was going to be so same but different, what I thought would be useful for us and for everyone listening, and maybe some new people who might pick up the show, is just a primer of what is it going to be like? Because we've all seen an F1 race, presumably, but there are going to be some differences, and I guess I wanted to just refresh for everybody the state of play, but also maybe cover what you might see differently on your TV screens. So we've got lots of notes to get through, but we'll use them as a jumping off point for general discussion. I believe later too, you've got a super quiz that you're going to embarrass my lack of knowledge with, so stay tuned or skip forward to that if that's your favorite thing. But Zach, I mean, there's been a couple of new things recently, and by new things I mean literally new things for your eyes to gaze at and lust over, with new liveries for Williams and then the big one, Mercedes. What did you make of these cars?
I thought the Williams one was they kind of had to do it because they split with their sponsor.
Yeah,
right?
there was a bit of that.
They are no longer my favourite livery because they were that beautiful Colgate style red, white, blue livery. And maybe they weren't my favourite livery, but do you remember? God, we talked about them ages ago. Yep. That feels like a whole lifetime ago. This is the new COVID preseason episode. But good for them. It looks cool because it's simple. I think that's the thing nowadays, that when you see a Formula One car that looks kind of stark because it's almost just like one colour, a few sponsors on there, that it's like, oh yeah, you really get to see the design of the F1 car. And then if you compare that to quite busy liveries, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of discern the shape of the car and all the things that make it look quite beautiful. And then the Mercedes one, I mean, this is a move towards them showing their commitment to the diversity in Formula One at Mercedes, and a show of, how would you say it, like solidarity with diversity movements nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of been triggered in a little bit globally by this whole Black Lives Matters thing, but I think that the broader discussion is about equality of opportunity. And when you look around that F1 paddock and you see mostly men, mostly white, mostly European, that's problematic, because it means that there's a whole bunch of people who have just not had the same opportunity to show what they can do, and even given a chance to show what they can do. And this is sort of a big problem that everybody's dealing with. Mercedes has pledged to, number one, draw focus to the problem by coming out with this all-black livery, which I think looks really, really cool, especially in the renders. I mean, someone rightly raised that this is a bit of a problem when it comes to the fact of, driving a car on a dark grey surface, having a black or dark grey car. But anyway, we'll see what that's like. Hopefully it's okay. If they end up picking up that rocket sponsorship, that's going to be a big problem for them as well. But that's a problem for future Mercedes, so who cares? But also, it's not all just for show. The colours are a symbol, but behind the symbol is some actual action, and they're introducing some new programs and some funding to help get more diversity within their team across all levels. And obviously the big one is providing a level playing field within the motorsport racing regime, so they're focused a little bit on that, and obviously Lewis Hamilton's going to be a big player in that space. So, I mean, there's action behind the words, which is really big. That's really good. It's one of the things that we pointed out on our Black Lives Matter inspired sort of show. So I think there's good signs coming from Mercedes. And these are things that if you switched off, if you think, I'll just switch off from F1 during this whole off season and then switch on 5 minutes before the race, you're going to notice some different looking cars. So we thought we'd better call those out.
Definitely. I think it's a great move. And, I just love it when the powerful, rich companies in sports who have the ability, they're the ones who also have the kind of energy and maybe excess of resources to use their platform for positive change, as opposed to some of the smaller teams that are like, and I know they're owned by billionaires, and often they're just like a folly, a bit of fun, but the people within those teams are also scrambling every day to just like make things work. Whereas for Mercedes, they're a massive organization who racing is like firmly within their wheelhouse. They should be able to do some more, and I'm glad that internally there's been a push for that. Obviously a push from Lewis Hamilton as well, which is really commendable and admirable. And putting people like Bernie Ecclestone in their place over racist comments was also a highlight of my week, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think Lewis, if you want to see it, go and see what Lewis had to say about it. It just kind of brings up a whole lot of questions around how Formula One was run with Bernie and how it's run now, and how Formula One is used to sport wash countries and all that kind of stuff. I wish there was more conversation about it, and we've discussed it at length on this show, and I'm sure it'll come up again.
And a couple of tweets that went out recently as well.
Yes, exactly. So it's good to see Mercedes moving in the right direction, and I hope more teams follow.
Absolutely, and you mentioned Lewis Hamilton. Sizing up against him will be drivers along the lines of Sebastian Vettel, Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo, all of whom will be leaving the team that they're currently driving for at the end of the season, which is weird to say in the end of June and having not even started the season, but they're all coming in knowing that they're going to be saying sayonara, and obviously there's a bit of a question mark over it, especially Daniel Ricciardo and his relationship with Renault, but he's certainly projected out, and the team have certainly projected out that everything's fine. We've still got a race season to run, and we're still all getting on like best buds. But behind the scenes, you'd have to be wondering what they're really telling him and what they're really showing him, and he's going to be moving to one of the biggest competitors for Renault next year, so that's the only one that I would have a bit of a question mark over. So there are obviously three drivers, Sainz and Ricciardo with a very certain future, Vettel less so, but they're all making a move at the end of the season. Obviously there's a driver who's been sitting around waiting for probably the longest time out of any F1 rookie to get started. Nicholas Latifi still has not turned a wheel in anger at Williams, so those are some of the driver situations coming into the season.
I'm sure he'll get lots of opportunities to turn a wheel in anger at Williams. Probably mostly in anger. Yeah. It'll be mostly in anger.
Mostly angry wheels.
Something I wanted to mention, just from watching other sports coming back, is that the younger athletes seem to have been coping a little bit better with the rigours of coming back to a sport after such a long break, from a fitness perspective. I don't have the data on fewer injuries happening to younger players or younger athletes, but they definitely seem to be maybe more equipped to cope with the much faster and more heavy workload in the new schedules. And I wonder if the younger drivers will come back better to Formula One than some of the older drivers will. Thinking about people like Kimi Räikkönen, how fit did he stay over this break? You take the structure away, I wonder how structured he was able to stay at home. I'm not questioning his focus, but people have in the past, lack of simulator work, those kinds of things. I wonder if there's an opportunity from some of these younger drivers, who have been doing, competing in simulator sports, so they're keeping the competitive edge up as well and just kind of staying focused. I really am interested to see if we'll be able to see anything like that, especially in these first three races, because, we're back 3 races in 3 weekends. That's a heavy workload for, maybe if you're on the older end of the spectrum, say Sebastian Vettel, Kimi Räikkönen, that kind of thing.
Not worried at all about Kimi Räikkönen losing focus, because you have to have focus to lose some. Anyway, I think you're right that the younger drivers that are just a bit more nimble, that are easy to switch on into that top gear immediately, are probably going to fare a little bit better. But they're also the ones that are going to have a little bit of an itchy trigger finger, so they'll be ones to watch as well.
Do you think they'll be a bit impatient? You think we'll see some first corner debacles because there'll be a mix of people who are totally switched on and those who totally aren't?
I think they'll just be a little bit extra jittery, that's all. So yeah, coming into the season, obviously it's a completely redesigned season so far. So we've already covered a little bit of what the layout of the first sort of leg of the season is going to look like. But I did want to recap that because we've had a few questions answered, I guess. So obviously we're going to start with 2 back-to-back races in Austria. And if you've been wondering, like I have, how are they going to have 2 races in Austria? Because normally there's 1 per place, and we say that was the Austrian Grand Prix from 2020. If there's 2, how do they differentiate? And I've got the answer. The answer is that the first one's going to be called the Austrian Grand Prix. The second one's going to be called something called the Styrian GP. Not sure what the background of that is, but they are going to have different names. So there's the answer to that one. But yeah, 2 races back-to-back in Austria, then off to Hungary for 1 race. 2 back-to-back races at Silverstone. Same problem there. If you've got 2 British Grand Prix in 1 year, how do you differentiate? The first one's going to be called the British Grand Prix. The second one's going to be called the Formula One 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. Brackets, it's also going to be run at Silverstone. One difference that they're going to make here, and obviously back-to-back races has been a concern, but they are going to change tyre compounds slightly here, and they're going to be 1 step harder for the second race. So then we go off to Spain, Belgium, Italy, and then the rest of the season is still TBC. But yeah, that's the first 8 races laid out ahead of us. A few interesting little tidbits there, but I mean, is this enough? Is this enough certainty going into this first race for you, Zach, to be like, I feel confident and I trust that this season isn't just going to fall to shit after that?
Well, they desperately wanted to do 8 races, right? And they were like, if we get to 8 races, it's going to be a world championship. And we were talking about this back in March, you know, that's going to be enough. That could be it. You know, you've got notes here. We've got notes here that you wrote. I didn't write them. You've got notes here about the postponed but not quite officially cancelled Bahrain, Vietnam, China, Canada, Russia, US. You know, I would argue that, and Mexico, Brazil, and Abu Dhabi. Yes. I would argue that anything in the Americas is totally up in the air right now.
Definitely,
in the US and South America as well.
They're all in the
World
less
Health
likely
Organization.
If there's 2 columns, more likely or less likely, the US, Mexico, Brazil are all in the less likely. Even Canada probably moving into the less likely. Perhaps the more likely, Russia, Abu Dhabi, even Bahrain, I don't think so. China, Vietnam, don't think so. China, I would say almost definitely not, just not officially postponed. So, yeah, I mean, look, let's say we get through these 8 as scheduled. That's all well and good. Can we maybe scramble 2 or 3 out of these ones? Can we also maybe assume that if we go to Russia, that we might end up with 2? I mean, let's hope not, but we pencil in 1 for Russia, maybe 2 for Abu Dhabi. That gets us to 11, which brings us to the next point, which is really, they're looking around at other places that we might even be able to run races. Unbelievably, Mugello, which is owned by Ferrari and is usually used for motorcycle racing and stuff like that, might go racing there. Imola hasn't hosted an F1 race since 2006. Might go back to Imola for
San Marino.
Woo, 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 woo. And then Portimao, which I don't know how to say, Portimao in Portugal. Never even heard of it, but apparently there's a track there. So there's a few options. We might be going into some pretty freaking crazy places this year.
Yeah, is there enough time for you and I to make a track and get people there? I mean, it kind of makes sense to do just all this racing in Europe, right? I know it doesn't sit well with the rest of the world, and I know that we've just talked about how Eurocentric Formula One and the people are in Formula One is, but that sentence didn't make any sense. But you know what I mean? It's a very European-centric sport, and then to be like, well, let's just race all in Europe for the whole year, and that will work out just fine because everywhere else it's all going to be too hard. And that's kind of true at this stage because it's not just about well, can you have to get the facilities? It's does that country have a bilateral agreement with all the other countries on people coming in without quarantine or not? Are there air bridges between those countries? All of this kind of stuff. I was thinking before, Australia had some recent small outbreaks. It's well, could you get some racing back in Australia before, could you get 2 back-to-back races in Australia at a couple of tracks or in Melbourne or something like that? But again, because Melbourne's a street circuit, maybe not. So it wouldn't surprise me if in a last-ditch effort to get more likely 12 to 15 races, they might just do them all in Europe mixed with, as you said, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, a couple of these other places where there weren't many people going anyway. And you could just, they're out in the middle of nowhere, so you could just get everybody into the airport, off to the hotel, off to the racetrack, and just kind of run, 2 races over 9 days there. So I am. It's all. If you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago before this second wave started hitting all these other countries, I would have been like, yeah, they'll get like at least 12 races done, no worries. But now, there's even chances that some of these European races might not run. You know, there are small chances that some of these countries might just go.
If we get cases in the paddock, these are real chances. Like the majority of these might get cancelled.
Yeah, exactly. You know, especially when we talk about places. You know, it depends. You know, the UK just put Leicester, one of the towns in the UK or in England, into its own personal lockdown. You know, if you had. You know, around Silverstone, if those places had to go into lockdown specifically after one weekend, would they delay that race? Would they cancel that race? What if there were outbreaks, you know, in Spain, Belgium, Italy that affected the racing? They could all go away too. So it is all very up in the air. But I hope, and maybe they hope as well, that the Formula One is just going to come back, get these 8 races done in 8 races in 10 weeks. I think it is. Like it's so quick. You know, and then it'll be like, at least if we just get those done, we can call it a season, and whatever happens to the rest of it, we'll at least be able to kind of crown a winner. It is full on. It's funny, because I was just trying to think, when we had 2 podcasts, one before I came to Melbourne for the race, and we were discussing, is it what's going to happen, and then when I was in Melbourne and the race had been cancelled, and we did a show, and we were just discussing whether we would get any racing at all, and I think I said we'd be lucky to get 8 races. Do you remember how many you said? Does that come back to you at all?
I feel like you said we would get more than 8. I feel like I said we'd be lucky to get 8, maybe scrape through.
Yeah, that could be
8.
right.
Can't remember. Someone check the tape on that. I'll get the interns on that one.
How do you feel now, though? I put it back to you. How do you feel looking at these?
I mean... it's impossible to tell until we really get through 1 or 2. I mean, we're going to go through in a minute all of the precautions that are being taken and sort of how the paddock will be set up differently. And I guess if this is maintained, if this regime that they've set up is maintained, we might get through okay. But I mean, I worry that complacency will also slip in. But one thing is for sure, this season is even as it goes along, it's going to be constantly changing, and races will be scheduled, and then extra races will be scheduled. Someone mentioned, what happens if Lewis Hamilton pulls out a huge lead and then there's not enough races left for anyone else to win? He gets crowned champion, and then they announce another race, and then all of a sudden mathematically that equation changes, and all of a sudden they have to take it back. Or the other way around, the races get cancelled and they're like, surprise, you won. I mean, that's just gonna suck. I mean, I know the world's made out of suck right now, but everyone should be preparing themselves for this to be a hairy, wild ride. I wanted to close off this section by saying that I saw some tweets from Codemasters who were pretty surprised when Williams and Mercedes announced new liveries, because they were like, we've got our game locked down, ready to ship for 2020. The F1 game's ready to go, and they're going and changing everything on us. Thanks very much. But they have actually confirmed, we don't give a fuck if we go racing in Imola. We are not building Imola into the game. That's just not happening, because our developers have families and they need to eat and sleep. We've already been working our asses off, so that's just not going to happen. But maybe it's time to move into the next section, which is going to be, what is the F1 world going to look like in a post-COVID environment? So you might have heard a little bit about some of the changes that are going to be made. We're going to run through all the bits and pieces. So as you're sitting there watching it on TV, hopefully none of this is going to come as too much of a shock to you. Obviously, most of the time you'll be watching, moving camera angles of cars going through swooping corners, and it's going to look awesome. But there are going to be some things that are going to be different, and we don't want you to be shocked. So the first one, face masks. You're going to see face masks everywhere, and personal protection equipment. Basically, as much as people can wear it, they will be wearing it. That includes face masks. Some people are going to be wearing full face clear shields, almost like a welder's mask made out of clear plastic sort of thing. A little bit like an aero screen, but for your face. So that's a nice, fun, sexy way to sell that. Any thoughts on this, Zach?
It's kind of funny, right? Because we see people mostly in face shields and helmets and those kinds of things, at least during the race, the pit crew are all wearing the helmets a lot of the time, you're not on the pit wall, obviously, but I'm sure they'll be wearing face masks on the pit wall. I don't even know what pit wall access will necessarily look like, whether they'll have the same amount of... It's just going to be really interesting, because will there be the same amount of people around in the areas where we would expect them to be, like in the pit crew and on the pit wall, those kinds of things?
Well, we've got plenty of notes about some of that, but yeah, I think you're right. There's going to be generally a different vibe, and places where you might normally see hordes of people, you may not see many people at all.
Yeah. So yeah, but I would expect the face mask, face shield thing. It's going to look a little bit different, but it doesn't surprise me.
The weird thing for me is, and this is probably different between you and me, but here people aren't really wearing masks very much at all. It's not required. Certainly distancing is required. Certainly, if you're sick, you're encouraged to stay home, all that kind of stuff. But I believe over there it's pretty different, right?
It's a big problem with the UK specifically, is that there has been almost no guidance on masks, and people aren't wearing them.
Do you need a mask to ride on the train?
You do need a mask to ride on public transport. That is true.
Right.
Basically, no one's using public transport, but no one is. I reckon I went for a walk this morning, and I would say that I saw probably 300 people, and I reckon I saw 2 masks.
Wow.
So,
okay.
No, the UK has a massive mask problem in the fact that people aren't choosing to wear them.
That is a problem.
So, hopefully, that won't be the same for sport. People will be wearing them everywhere, and I think that across other countries that maybe treated the virus with a little bit more care or urgency, especially in Europe, masks were a priority in other countries. I don't like to use the word Europe blank, like as a broad stroke, because it's a massive conglomeration of countries. So, but where the countries like Spain and Italy, where they were hit really hard, masks were definitely a part of overcoming that. But there's been no really good formal advice other than, wear them when you go on public transport. But it's not like wear them when you go into a coffee shop. It's just kind of like keep your distance and don't have too many people in there.
Yeah, that's weird because especially in Australia, we've had cases, obviously, we've locked things down to try and keep it under control. Masks just haven't really been part of the conversation because people were like, well, let's go there if we need to, but otherwise let's do everything else. But as especially my state goes into something of a kind of a second wave, masks are back on the table in the conversation. Some of the points that we were on the verge of getting into before, things like fewer people, not just in the grandstands, but teams themselves can only bring 80 staff to run a whole team. This is the previous upper limit was 130. A lot of the people that have been cut are sort of media people, PR people, hospitality people. At the track generally, some media people can be in attendance, but they can't go into the paddock. So there's just generally going to be a lot fewer people around. And then talking about protective equipment during the pit stops, you might be wondering what's that going to look like. Obviously, like you said before, the crew in the pit stops are usually wearing all kinds of protective stuff, full body protective stuff. So they're actually going to probably look more or less the same in terms of pit stops. The same number of people covered in the same kind of way. If you're hoping to get a glimpse of flesh, you will not be getting that. But pit stops might be one of the only things that looks similar, but there's going to be a lot of air around the cars and the garages. I think there's just going to be a notable, almost like it'll seem like there's a skeleton crew in there, and you'll sort of get a glimpse of a garage, and you think, boy, they usually look a lot busier. They're going to look, it's going to look a lot more like a practice day.
Yeah, I wonder about the noticeable crowd difference. I've got 2 things on that. Whether I don't know what impact that's going to have on the teams or even on the running of the race. I'd said in the past that maybe drivers won't feel that maybe they'll be a little more relaxed because they won't be being watched by thousands of people and they won't be embarrassed when they make a mistake. But I think they still will be embarrassed because they know that they're going to be on TV and all that kind of stuff. The other thing is, maybe I haven't done my due diligence on this, but how is Formula One affording to do this? Because how are the tracks affording to do this? We always hear every year, it feels like half the tracks are like, I don't know if it makes enough money, and will we sign a new contract, and we really do need to upgrade our facilities so we can get more people or make them nicer for people who come. How are all of these tracks affording not to have literally hundreds of thousands of people come through the gates, buy heaps of food, buy heaps of merch, buy tickets, all this kind of stuff? Why would the race promoters, in these countries desperately want to run the race? Surely Liberty Media and the broadcasters must just be giving all the money to them, right? Liberty Media must be funding a lot of this, because there's no way that that Austria can afford to run 2 races back to back with nobody coming through. Maybe it doesn't cost them too much because they don't have to facilitate all those people coming as well, but it does still cost something, and it's still a lot of work to get a Formula One race to happen. So I wonder who's paying for it and how it's being paid for. I'm not asking you as if you've got the answer.
I mean, I wouldn't claim to know that I know all the answers, but from what I can tell, it seems like FOM and Liberty are taking a bath on the race fees to the most degree. Clearly, they've cut some deals. Clearly, if you're Red Bull and you're in the what do they call it, the Red Bull ring?
Yep.
You're probably going to get group deal, buy one get one half price. But I mean, they're getting value for money because they're getting 2 races for whatever money they get out of it. So even if they have to take 50% reduction, if they're running two races, hey, you're back to something like normal footing. The other thing is, number one, the race fees will be drastically cut to virtually nothing. F1's just desperate to run a season right now. But the other thing is that working in this sort of space, there's a sort of thinking of if we can project that our country or our city is safe, when we are ready to open up and have people move around, we might be more likely to be top of mind than otherwise. So, I mean, in other words, from a tourism point of view, and a lot of the races that are government sponsored are sponsored on the basis that lots of tourism dollars coming in from this race for this event. If you can project that you've done everything right, that you're the kind of place that takes safety seriously and is one of the first places that's going to be hygienic, safe. You'll be protected if you come here. All that kind of stuff. That's a good thing. All I can think is that there's the combination of those two things that might be playing a factor there. But yeah, for sure, Liberty are just keen to get a season out the door, and just they'll probably end up
they can send it,
cutting people deals for years down the line if they have to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, should we move on to talk a little bit about testing? Because I'm really interested in this. And so, what? Team members have to test negative. It was every 2 days, right?
This is one of those Trump things where it's like you have to test positive, by which you mean you have to test negative. It used to be, this was reported, and we reported this, they were going to be tested every 2 days. That's somehow now been relaxed, and they'll have to test negative and prove they don't have the coronavirus before they go to the place that the race is being run, and then they'll get tested every 5 days, we're hearing now, which seems... I'm worried about that, because every 2 days, that fills me with confidence. Every 5 days, boy, that's a long time in the coronavirus world. But they're going to be doing lots of testing, that's to say, and you're going to have to be clear before you can go in. So that's, I guess, a good thing. If anyone gets sick, if they show any symptoms, they're going to get tested straight away. Every day there's going to be temperature checks for people entering the paddock, so I guess that's at least some kind of a barrier or a reassurance that if you are picking up a temperature and you may be not fully aware that you've got something, temperature might be an early sign, and they're going to be checking people on a daily basis. Of course, the drivers are going to be tested, just like everyone else. They're going to get tested, and there are going to be allowances for, just like they would at a normal race, if a driver is sick and has to isolate and sub out, a test reserve driver can sub in.
I wonder if partly to do with this moving from 2 to 5 day testing is that once you're at the because the races are happening so close together, that they're getting tested before they go into the track. So I'm guessing that's outside of this every 2 or 5 day testing. So they're getting tested before they move into like the F1 bubble, right? And then once you're in the F1 bubble, everybody there either doesn't have it, or the test was wrong, and then essentially everybody kind of does have it. So testing them every 2 days, they should have been in such an isolated environment that there is no way they could have got it unless somebody already had it within that kind of within the travelling circus.
The other thing I would just say is that what if you're Lewis Hamilton, you're going into the race that might clinch the championship for you, and you test positive? Are you going to just take that, or are you going to say, look, I want another test. Every time you test me, do 2 tests. Test me every day. Why wouldn't you test him every day? This is lunacy. I think 5 days is crazy. And I would say perhaps also that this is the minimum. They may do more than this. Teams may do their own testing. People may do their own testing. But this is what's been laid out as the minimum. I think it's too minimum.
Yeah, I think you're kind of right. I think that just because of the, as I said, 10 weeks of racing, test every 2 days. That's 100 and that's how many tests? 10 weeks, that's 70, so 35 tests per person. We're talking 80 people per 20 teams. That's 100 and, that's what, 1,600. Is it really 1,600 people? Yeah, 1,600 people,
yeah.
50 tests. We're talking thousands and thousands of tests. That's a lot of work to do, and who knows if that amount of tests is even available to Formula One. I'm not sure. I'm sure that they probably are, but where are they being processed? Does the processing place have enough capacity to process them? All of these kinds of things, and we've seen in other sports it happened in the AFL, and it's happened to my beloved Arsenal as well. Positive tests.
So if
for
you're
players.
playing the bingo game where you drink, when Zach mentions Premier League, drink now.
Yeah, well, it's one of the only sports that's actually running, and has been running relatively successfully for 2 weeks now. All right. But players testing positive, and they're being told they need to isolate, and the players they've been playing with need to isolate for at least 7 days, and then getting another test like the day of, and it's like, oh no, you're actually negative. That was a false positive, so you can play having no preparation or anything like that. It's incredibly disruptive. And I know we're talking low stakes here; it's sport, but it's not like there aren't false positive tests, and I guarantee with the sheer amount of testing they're going to be doing, there will be false positives. And the other side of that is, will there be false negatives? But more likely, there will be lots of false positives, and I wonder how that's going to impact. As you said, what if somebody's personal assistant has it, and then it's like, well, they've been closely in contact with that driver for the last 3 days, even though that driver's testing negative, that close contact, we can't trust the tests, we're just going to have to take that person out of preparation. Like, they can't be near the team. There's no way that driver would then be able to just hop in the car on race day and give it a go, because that's not really how Formula One works, or any sport works. You need to have done some prep. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes. And because it's totally closed and a privately run sport, I wonder how much stuff we'll even hear about, because we're not getting the same amount of crossover between, there's not going to be as much scrutiny from journalists because there won't be as many there. We're going to get none of the sideshow around Formula One that happens. So it's actually Formula One delivered in the way that I like it, which is it'll just be kind of the racing and the qualifying and stuff. It won't be all the other bullshit that goes around that. Other people really enjoy, but I don't sit around watching the whole Formula One day just because there's a race. I don't watch Sky Sports from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. because there's only 90 minutes of racing actually in there. But there'll be far less of that. No paddock, no crossover. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for the sport to just keep all of that anonymous, internalized, and we probably won't even hear half the things that happen and half the stuff that are having to be quarantined and all this kind of stuff, because there will be no one to trade that gossip and that scuttlebutt.
Yeah, true. There's a bunch of mini points, I guess, so we can maybe blow through a couple of these. One of them is that there's a new F1 app, not the kind that you or I could get, but there's a custom track and tracing app that's being used to help identify contacts. In the event that someone does test positive, they can track who they've been in contact with. We have that kind of thing. I'm sure there's that kind of thing over there as well. They're generally pretty shit, but that's mostly because governments get involved and they fuck everything up. So, look, I've got every confidence that if people use this, Lewis Hamilton will install it on his BlackBerry and his iPhone. We all know he uses both. Wink, wink. Of course he doesn't. But anyway, there's going to be a track and trace app custom for the F1 paddock. Maybe we'll just blow through a couple of these quickly. Yeah. You might be wondering what's going to happen with the press conferences. Most of the media and press conferences are going to happen over Zoom or something similar to that. Kimi Raikkonen's wet dream, he could probably just record a video of himself nodding and then saying yes, and they could just loop that for a long time. There's not going to be any motorhomes, so this is going to be different. The paddock itself is going to look different. No big motorhomes that you might be accustomed to seeing. At the back of the garages, there's just going to be some tents and awnings, and teams are just going to have to make do with that. There's going to be less time on the grid pre-race. So this means the drivers won't line up for the national anthem like they usually do. No chance to go over and dack Lando Norris or pull his hat off or anything weird like that. Less time for people to set up on the grid. So, people kind of just hang out on the grid, and it seems like the whole friggin' team is out there, and you get celebrities
and
walking
up
and down.
Yeah.
That's something that is gonna look different, I think. That view of the cars, fewer people around them, and they're not gonna just be seemingly setting up all day long to just get ready to the track. It's gonna be shorter time, less people, no muss, no fuss. Post-race, there's not going to be a podium because obviously there's no one there to look up at the drivers on the podium, so why would you do that? It's going to feel a bit weird, but the top drivers, it's expected, will drive onto a special designated part of the track where they'll pull into first, second, and third trophies. It's understood we'll be waiting for them there, or there'll be some kind of person to do some kind of respectfully socially distanced handover. But that's going to be a different, strange one as well. You'll just get out and pick up your own trophy, I guess, and interview yourself. I don't know. And then there's a couple more around people moving around and stuff. But does anything out of that stuff that I've already run through jump out that you want to comment on?
I'm going to be the the whole thing, I think, is going to appear less fun and way more serious, which is going to be really frustrating, because that is something that you and I love about this sport, is how silly it is and how like there is a lot of fun between drivers and personality. And yes, that's exactly the character of the sport. And I feel like the character is now very serious. Like everybody's socially distancing, whereas no big celebrations. It's probably going to feel. And maybe this is what I mean by the crowd thing. The whole thing might appear to be lower stakes because it is kind of unsure. A lot of other sports suspended midway through their season, so those stakes carried over into the next. Like when they suddenly picked up again, it was like, well, there's all this shit to play for. Whereas Formula One was this is just a new weird asterisk season, right? So it's like, well, if something goes wrong, it's like, well, it just went wrong, and get back to the pits, or just hop out of the car and we yellow flag the race, and blah blah blah. So it might just feel like the stakes are lower. That might lead to some really interesting racing, because people might be a bit more laissez-faire, send it up down the line because, well, who cares? Because we're not going to win this championship anyway. So let's just see how it goes. So maybe that will make things really exciting and interesting. But yeah, overall, I think that it's going to kind of be like, tune in for 90 minutes to 2 hours of racing and then turn it off, and that'll kind of be it. There's not going to be that warm fuzzy glow afterwards.
I do agree. I think that the atmosphere will be the air will just be gone from the atmosphere, and the especially for the broadcast, the focus will just be on 5 minutes before the race, do this thing, and then we might interview the drivers, from a remote area, and then that's it. And then tune out. No post show, no waving to the crowd, no slow montage of scenes or anything. It's going to be a lot more get in, get out. But I mean, we'll wait and see. And then in terms of the character, look, I mean, these are still people. These people always find a way to make things. What am I trying to say? Their personality will still shine in whatever restrictions they've got. So they'll make do with what they've got. I'm sure that it'll be better than the worst case scenario, but I just don't know how close to the best case scenario it'll be. Okay, let's finish off some of these last points before we can move on. The last one is social bubbles. So individual teams and other logistical groups like stewards or marshals will be restricted from mixing company. So this is to say that if you're a Ferrari driver, you won't be hanging out post-race with the Haas drivers or whoever. They're going to create little theoretical groups, and you won't be able to leave your group and mix, because in the event that there is an outbreak, you want to contain it as much as possible. Within that team, they're asking the teams to actually break down even further into little sub bubbles, so you'd have all the race strategists that hang out together and all the mechanics that hang out together, but you try not to mix if possible. They're even talking about in the garages, you have like an indoor and an outdoor, a different one, to stop people from just crisscrossing all the time. So as much as possible, they're trying to isolate people from each other as well, which is sort of interesting. And that extends to where they're staying in terms of accommodation. You might be wondering, what the heck are they going to do? They have block booked hotels. It's like schoolies. You just book all the rooms, and then everyone just goes and stays together but separate, if you know what I mean. And they're expected to spend all their downtime in the hotels. So no fun for you. You'll be watching a lot of Netflix and listening to a lot of podcasts maybe. But that's how they're trying to keep people together that need to be together, but restrict their access to other people.
Yeah, I wonder if like Martin Brundle and David Cross will be even going to the races. Like, what? Because they're not journalists in the traditional sense. They're presenters, and it's not like, I mean, why put those people in a room where they're watching the screens and stuff when they could just do that from a studio? And they could do all the...
It is a huge opportunity, for them to just sit and watch a TV. And I'll tell you, it wouldn't be the first time someone has commentated on a race via TV.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder how many people, like someone like Sky Sports, would even be sending to this race. Obviously, all the journalists from all the different places.
Camera people, it'll be like people who need to be there to deliver the images. If it were me, I would definitely not be sending, people to do interviews and stuff. That's crazy. I wouldn't do any of that.
No, you don't need like, Simon Lazenby and the crew and the boy crew hanging out.
Anyway,
no.
But anyway.
What's Nico Rosberg going to do?
Race. More weird YouTube content, probably.
Yes.
Cut to the race, and then when the racing's done, cut back to a studio with a panel of people sitting around and talking. That's more what I expect it'll probably be, with perhaps an interview with a driver who just, it'll be him and a cameraman 3 meters apart from each other, and then there'll be a TV, let's talk to Daniel Ricciardo, see how he did and whatever. It'll probably be more that kind of vibe. That's what I would be going for anyway. Be very surprised, especially if Martin Brundle is there.
Which is what it often is for countries that don't
Lots
have
of other sports, yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, that's what it
Exactly.
is. Like, if you, like, that's what Australian broadcaster Formula One used to be like. You know, you would cut to the international feed, but cut back to the studio where, you know, Alan Jones is sitting there talking to somebody, or Mark Webber
Greg
sitting
Rust
there,
or
whoever
whoever.
it is. Yeah, Greg Rust, exactly. You know, it was, it
Those were
didn't
good
make,
days.
yeah, it doesn't make sense for every country to send out, or every broadcaster to send out its own massive team. So, yeah, it happens all the time with other sports. It happens with cricket all the time. You know, if Australia's playing in India at a weird time zone, they cut back to the Australian studio and talk to the Australian experts in the studio.
Whoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Bradley.
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. Before we head into our next segment, one thing these notes don't accommodate for, Rod, is whether you have any gut feel about how this season is going to go? Do you expect continued dominance from teams? Do you want to give me, or do you want to save that as some final thoughts?
Maybe we'll leave it for final thoughts. That'll be a nice, juicy, it'll be a last note to finish on, and then, of course, when the race is run and we're completely wrong, we'll, as usual, be the laughing stock of the F1 podcasting scene. So, yeah, maybe we put a button on that one and we'll hit it later.
Cool.
All right. Well, then I believe, let me just refer to my notes. Superquiz. All right. Well, I guess we do that.
We will accept a couple of questions. Should one only win one? Would one want to have won that one in round one?
Can you repeat the question?
Now, Zachary, I sure as heck haven't got a super quiz for you to do, so I really hope you've got one for me to do.
That's awkward. I was going to try and find some traditional Austrian prose or poetic styles and make a quiz out of that, but I thought, no, that would be lame. So why don't we do, because of all the livery chat this week, let's do a livery and let livery quiz. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, as always, hopefully the best part of the quiz isn't the name. But no, other than that, I feel great about it.
Sweet. Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions for you on liveries and sponsors on those liveries to go through. A colourful selection of fun question and multiple choice answers, although the first one, it doesn't have multiple choice. It's going to be the traditional lob, simple question, hopefully. So here we go, Rod. Are you ready for the livery and the livery quiz?
Never been more ready.
Cool. Well, question number 1. What did Honda replace their colour scheme and sponsors with in 2007?
Colours, the one thing I'm no good at. I don't know, red and white.
No, it was a full livery change. Like, what was the idea? They were basically, you know how cars would usually have colours and sponsors and all this kind of stuff. And in 2007, they're like, we're not going to do all that kind of junk. We're going to do one specific thing.
Was it all white?
No, it was the. This was the Earth car, the colourful depiction of
Earth car.
Yeah,
They did that.
Yeah, showed their support for environmental.
Honda was involved.
Yeah, it was them. They were like, you know what? We're really environmentally friendly, and it's a big initiative. And we're gonna. It was a depiction of Earth from space. So, and then kind of spread out all over the car. It is a weird thing. Definitely memorable. But I mean, it was funny because I don't think it was as memorable because then we quickly moved into like the Braun era and those late 2000s series were all super weird. The cars were super weird looking anyway. All right, question number 2. The Jordan 191, which was debuted in 1991, is regarded as one of the most beautiful racing cars ever, apparently. I didn't know this, but apparently at the time it was. But it was garishly logoed. I looked at it and I was like, oh, that's like the convenience store car, because one major sponsor was Tic Tac. Do you know the other major sponsor? It's interesting because I've got... it was the car that Michael Schumacher also made his F1 debut in, the Jordan 191. The choices are... Was it A, Coca-Cola, B, 7-Up, or C, Ribena?
Oh, I did have an option in mind, but it was none of those. So,
what was your option? Tell me.
No, I remember the Jordan car of like the late 90s was sponsored by Benson and Hedges. And then I was like, he's going to say Benson and Hedges and Tic Tacs, and that's, go to the milk bar, get some Benson and Hedges, and then Tic Tac after for your breath or whatever. But anyway, I'm miles off, so never mind that. So give me those options again: Ribena and 7-Up, and what other?
Coca-Cola.
I believe it was 7-Up though.
It was 7-Up. Ding, ding, ding.
Yes.
It's incredible because it's just like 7-Up on the top, Tic Tac on the side. It is a nice looking car though.
That's what we call the Jordan.
Yeah.
Give me the Jordan, people say.
Yeah. Business on top, Tic Tac on the sides. Now, are you a one at a time Tic Tac guy, or do you just like bang the packet on your hand until like 13 come out and just eat them all at once?
Definitely not one. Definitely as many will come out in one or two shakes as possible, and definitely only ever orange. Forget mint. Don't want mint. Forget that. Orange all the way.
Orange. I can't believe anybody buys the mint flavors. Get gum if you want mint.
Or buy some mint. Sell any? Jeez.
Yeah, I know. What a treat. Anyway, question number 3. Which of these has not been an F1 livery sponsor? Is it A, ABBA, B, Xena, Warrior Princess, 3 or C, Law and Order, or D, Star Wars? Which of these has not been an F1 livery sponsor?
I think it's Law and Order.
It's Law and Order. Yes, that was the standout performer there. I didn't know about ABBA or Xena Warrior Princess. These are.
I knew about those two.
I feel like, actually, when I was writing the quiz, I was like, surely this has come up in one of our super license quizzes before. Surely this is a super quiz answer.
I remember that, but...
Yeah, but I tried to make Law and Order seem like it wasn't.
I remember
guessable.
there was some crossover with the Star Wars movie, but I was trying to think whether there was a livery. But I was like, nah, surely there must have been a livery.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was it's Red Bull, and I think it was at Monaco or something like that. Yeah, it was a nice weird crossover. Yeah, and then ABBA, because one of the drivers was Swedish, or one of the owners, and it was like, hey, I want to promote Sweden. And then Xena Warrior Princess was because Channel 5 in the UK was launching, and they were like, we're going to sponsor a car at Silverstone, and Xena's one of the shows on Channel 5, so let's put that on the car. So
it's as good a reason as any.
I would say so, and you got it right again. I can't imagine a Law and Order sponsored car, but I can imagine if something dun-dun related would be great.
What happens on Netflix when they watch Law and Order? Because they've got dun-dun as well.
Dun-dun.
Is there competing trademarks there?
I really hope the Netflix sound designer guy, that's all his CV says. Like, oh, so what did you do at Netflix? And he's like, I did the dun-dun. Oh, get this guy in. Maybe it's the same guy. Maybe he's the guy who did the Law and Order dun-dun as well.
So was it 2 dun-duns or was it 1 and they looped it?
Oh, is it just
all
a single
questions
dun?
You could ask.
Good questions. You're a good interviewer. Okay, question 4. You and I, we both love the Martini branded Williams. Can you tell me the first car that Martini sponsored with that style livery? Was it A, Lancia, B, Ferrari, or C, Porsche?
Is this in F1 or just generally?
This is just generally.
Must be just generally, because Porsche, yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I know that Porsche had that a little while ago. Can't imagine Ferrari ever did that. So what was the other option again? Lancia? Lancia. I'll go with them, Lancia.
It's tempting to go Lancia because they made them famous. They were the 80s rally cars in that. That's the boxy Lancias with that beautiful Martini branding. But no, it was Porsche in the late 60s. The Martini
they've been around a long time.
Yeah. I thought I'd seen this car, but I had seen a later Martini-sponsored Porsche at the Porsche factory. But the early ones, it's such cool livery. It's so good. I wish that there was more of that, please.
I have to hang up that big poster that I've got. Still... The one I got from Singapore, that one, you know the one.
Yeah.
It's still sitting framed, leaning against the wall behind another cupboard. I need to get it up on the wall.
So good. All right, question number 5. What 1976 Surtees sponsor was so raunchy that the BBC didn't cover the early races of the season so as not to offend the viewers? Was it A, Durex, B, Penthouse, or C, Tom Jones?
Mate, you pay extra if you get Tom Jones as a sponsor. You charge a premium for that. Now, Durex or Penthouse? I have a feeling that Playboy sponsored a car. I don't know whether Penthouse did. Maybe they did. And then Durex, I believe, is around as well, but there's nothing that offensive about it. Let's go Penthouse.
It was Durex.
Oh.
I mean, you're right. There was nothing too there's nothing too raunchy about Durex, It's but 1976, the BBC, and they were like, "Ooh, that's kind of sexy or raunchy. We're just not going to cut." Imagine just pulling out of covering the races. It's being like, you know what? That one sponsor can't do it. We're not going to be involved in F1.
British.
So British.
No Durex for us, please. We're British.
Yeah.
No F1 for us. We're British.
question, the last but not least, it's come up multiple times whilst we've been watching Drive to Survive, especially on when the driver cam, you can see the helmet of the drivers, or the pit, or the cockpit is, last but not least, what does map free do, Rod?
I knew this was going to be... You're an asshole and I hate you.
Do they do A, insurance, B, GPS mapping, or C, yachts?
Is map for doing mapping too obvious? What have I got to lose? I don't think it's going to be yachting. Let's go for mapping.
It's insurance, Rod. They're a big Spanish insurance firm. How lame, right?
So lame. I mean, insurance, not Mapfra. So they're great.
Lame. No, Mapfra, fine. Great, good on them. Whatever. But yeah, insurance. Just a big insurance company.
I just love the idea that you're like, yeah, I'm thinking about some insurance, but anyway, not really sure who I want to go with. Anyway, let's put on some F1. Weird that there's no crowds anyway. Mapfra, of course. My life is sordid.
F1 sponsorship is a little bit like that, though. You're like, why?
Yeah, it so much is.
Who's looking at Epson and being like, oh, you're an F1 sponsor, hey? Ooh, get some of your sweet whatevers. Fax machines, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, you probably know more about this than me, but surely it's less about putting the logo on the car and more about having the photo of the car in with their brochure.
Yeah,
to be like, you're expecting a dry, boring life insurance brochure. Surprise, here's colour signs. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Or that, you're not just sponsoring the car, right? You're sponsoring everything else. So you're also on all of the...
It's a lifestyle.
Like every single time Formula One is mentioned or that team you sponsor is mentioned, Epson is going to be somewhere in there as well. Epson, it's a lifestyle. Definitely not.
Well, next time I'm looking at some insurance, which I do on the reg, I will consider Mapfra.
Good, I'm glad. That's the livery and let livery quiz. I'm not going to check the tape, but I'm pretty sure you got all of them right, and you continue on probably on 6,000 or 7,000 points at this point, I would say.
I got all of the real ones right and the practice ones wrong, so I picked the right ones to get right or wrong. Well, look, I mean, there's no surprise left because we teased it before. We're going to use our final thoughts as a way of just giving our, impressions, guesses, predictions for the race, the season, what we're thinking, how we're feeling about things, yeah?
Yeah, I would say so. And because it's Austria, right? Will Red Bull come in with any kind of advantage? Max Verstappen?
This is what everyone's talking about. Obviously, Max Verstappen, the form driver for Austria, and he's gifted 2 races in what could be a very shortened season. Some people are saying this is really, no kidding, no jokes, his best chance at a championship, and it may be his best chance for a while. And obviously there's a concern about 2 races back-to-back. Is it just going to be a carbon copy the second week? But something just tells me that it won't be. It'll be different. Even if we get maybe the same winner, the rest of the field will be different enough that we'll be fine, or there'll actually be a different winner. I don't know. I also feel like we've known for a long time now that Austria was going to be the first race, or, the first serious charge. And I just have a feeling that Mercedes will have done everything that they can, brought whatever updates they need to bring to get the most out of, get the most out of the track, do whatever, to fill whatever deficit they have at this track. And Lewis Hamilton, boy, he's going to want to get out there and win just every single thing that he can, more than ever. So I would back Lewis to win one of the 2 races at least. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that because of the lack of testing all of the new upgrades and stuff that all the teams have brought or had in the pipeline, I think that the conservative and probably correct choice is that Mercedes is going to be really strong. Plus, they got that sweet driver-assisted steering thing going on.
Yes.
Which who knows if they'll run. I wouldn't run it if I was them. I think that every chance Mercedes will win one of these races. I think you're spot on. If Mercedes are winning, there's only really one guy who wins when Mercedes is winning, and that's Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah, that's true. So he wins when he's winning.
Yeah, and I firmly suspect that Sebastian Vettel is going to struggle these 2 races. I think he's just not going to be in the zone at all. And when things don't go well for him, they tend to go terribly. So I think he's going to just be like, what am I even doing here? This was not maybe the farewell season he had in mind for Ferrari if he was going to be leaving. And it's a kind of a nothing asterisk quarter season as well. So I just don't think he will be nowhere near it. Maybe okay qualifying, but I just don't think in the race he's going to make good decisions. So I firmly suspect Sebastian Vettel to have a poor race weekend or race period even, and I would be looking out for people like Carlos Sainz Jr. to be like, showing how he deserves that Ferrari seat, and maybe a couple of other like little pushes from some of the other mid-tier drivers trying to pop their heads up for what could turn into an interesting silly season for a lot of these races, because there will be some seats swapping around with the changes that we already mentioned. So yeah, I think it's going to get tasty in the midfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're probably onto a winner there with Sebastian Vettel. I think one of the talking points going into the season is how is he going to go? He's got absolutely nothing to lose, and we've seen that when he's in that position, he tends to cause a bit of mayhem, either driving into other cars, driving into his teammate, disobeying team orders. I guess people will be looking to him for a bit of fireworks, but the problem is going to be, is he going to even have the performance to be threatening? Or is he going to just be struggling to keep up with the top five? I think we're going to see probably more races where Leclerc puts a gap pretty easily, put a bit of distance between him and Vettel by even a couple of other cars. So meaning it may be like Mercedes, Leclerc, the two Red Bulls, and then Ferrari, the Ferrari of Vettel, something like that. That might happen more often than we think. The other thing I was going to say, looping back to that first point, that it's sort of advantage Verstappen by having two races in Austria, is that even if he gets a bit of a lead, he needs to create a buffer, because we are going to have those two races at Silverstone, which he obviously plays to Lewis Hamilton's strength. So he is, if Lewis Hamilton is ahead or near the front of the championship going into those two rounds at Silverstone, he may run away with it right after that and pull out a huge lead. So I don't know, do you want to go into any... I mean, we're going to be talking about the first race next week, so I don't know if you want to go into more predictions, but there's a few little spicy things on the table.
I think there are some spicy things. I think it's going to be interesting, especially at those teams that you mentioned, that one of those drivers is going away. That will mean that the limited resources available, 80 people in a team, it will mean that those resources are going into one driver. So think, it will be... what. Esteban Ocon, it will be Charles Leclerc, and it will be Lando Norris that will get all of those special resources. And those teams will be backing those drivers fully. So it'll be interesting, because especially at Ferrari, it was like, oh, well, we're behind we're behind Sebastian as well as we're behind Charles. So, we can't tell them what to do. Now it should just be like, fuck Sebastian. Like, yes, Charles, race, overtake. Yeah, you don't need to wait for anybody to catch. You don't need to give the position back. Just go. And Charles will be all over that. He'll be like, he's not even in the team next year. I'm ignoring your team orders, and I'm going to go chase him down. So, yeah, I hope that's the way it goes. I hope that I just hope that it's super weird, man. I really want it to be as quirky as possible. I want this to be nothing like a normal season. Like, lean into it. If it's going to be this weird, shortened Corona hit season, then make it as weird as possible. I wish they had lent into the reverse grids. Now, like, I'm coming to these conclusions more recently, and I'm like, I just want it to be all kinds of odd. I just hope it's not boring.
I don't think it will be. I think we'll do okay. One thing I did want to bring up is something has been mentioned a little while ago along the lines of, hey, Vettel's leaving the team, Sainz is leaving his team, Ricciardo's leaving his team. What happens if all of their teammates beat them at the end of the season? That'll be awkward. I want to put this out there. I don't think that Vettel's going to beat Leclerc this season. I don't think that Norris is going to beat Sainz this season. But I want us to make a prediction about what's going to happen between Esteban Ocon and Daniel Ricciardo at Renault at the end of the season. By the end of the season, whenever that is, who do you predict will be the better driver?
That's a really difficult question, because Esteban Ocon, people have forgotten, he was also a little bit of a hothead. He was also the kind of guy who was happy to crash into someone or take an inside line that maybe wasn't there. And Daniel Ricciardo has been known to cause some accidents as well. I don't think Daniel will take his foot off the pedal at all. I think he'll be going as hard as he can, and then maybe he's won a lot of races by taking an opportunity, and maybe there will be opportunities because the racing is going to be hopefully so weird. So I don't think Daniel will be looking at his teammate, but I think his teammate, Esteban Ocon, will be firmly looking at him and going like, I just need to beat you every single race, and I will make sure the team's efforts are focused on me. So I personally believe that Daniel, it will be close between those two. I don't think Daniel will wipe the floor with him, or vice versa, and I think Daniel will just edge out because he's got that like experience. I would say they have equal motivation, but Daniel has a bit more experience. And what do you reckon?
I think they're both a little bit rusty on form. Daniel through his own mental games and Ocon through circumstances beyond his control. So if anything, there's maybe more of a question mark over Ocon. But yeah, I agree it'll probably be close. I feel like Ocon will probably have the edge in qualifying, but I feel like Daniel might have the edge in race points. I also would predict out of the midfield teams, they'll probably have the most number of DNFs. That's what I would predict. Leaving aside, back market teams whose cars are rubbish. But yeah, I think they'll have the most DNFs between both of the drivers combined out of any of the midfield teams. So yeah, I think Daniel will edge slightly ahead, but I do think Ocon will have the edge in qualifying. That's my prediction.
Nice. Do you want to give us a Haas prediction? How many races will they finish?
Who fucking cares? Get rid of Grosjean. Oh, that's the thing I want to see. The other thing we're waiting on is driver announcements at Renault, but they've said that they're going to wait until we're racing. So, yeah, I guess that's something to watch for. But is
Grosjean
that exciting? Who's going to go there?
Grosjean's going to go.
You wish. Well, yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job setting up the season, setting the scene, and and discussing liveries from the 60s for some reason. So you know everything that you need to know about the 2020 F1 season going into the first race, and a couple of liveries from the days of yore. Zach, any last words to say before we say goodbye?
Nope, that's it. I'm looking forward to the racing. I wish it was tomorrow, but it's not. It's still a few days.
It's not that far away, and it'll be here before you know it. And then when it hits, boy, it's going to hit hard. So yeah, lots of races to come. Come with us on the journey. Stay subscribed. Tell a friend. Follow us on Twitter. We're at SuperLicense, and we'll try and tweet a little bit more during the races this year. And until next time, until race day, my name's been Rodney.
My name's been Zach.
I'll see you trackside. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh yeah.